I invented a new way to develop your stories. I think. Let me tell you about it. Since I was young, I wanted to tell stories well. My grandfather was a great storyteller, as was my own mother. But for some reason, I couldn't grasp what they had understood about storytelling. I often had that experience where I'm telling a group story and it gets interrupted and kind of just fizzles out. Nothing I would share made anyone actually interested enough to hear the story. Flash forward a bit and I started making videos. Ever since middle school, I've been creating whatever content I could. And as I learned more and more about social media, one thing kept coming up over and over. Story. That's what my content has been missing this whole time. That's why it gets 20 views despite the hours of work I might have put into a video. People kept telling me that my videos didn't pop off because they just weren't good. What they meant to say is that the story wasn't good. Just like when my stories would fizzle out in group settings. I still didn't quite understand storytelling, but that's where my grid system comes into play. When I discovered this way of structuring my stories, it completely changed my perspective on telling stories. So I began to study storytelling. I was reading forums, downloading PDFs, buying books, and I even spent hundreds of dollars on courses. But I was still getting nowhere. I was learning random facts and had some kind of information memorized, but I still didn't get it. I still had that terrible situation where I try to share a story and the people listening quickly fizzle out. In sharing my doubts and heartache over this mental blockage with my girlfriend, she encouraged me to keep going. Even though my heart was ready to give up on itself, I knew I had to keep going for her. So I dove into hours and hours of YouTube content. I watched so many videos, I think I've seen every video with the tag storytelling. Something that came up over and over was the 3-act structure. I thought to myself, if I memorize these, I can just apply all of my stories to this structure like a formula, and it'll be like I understand storytelling. So I began to memorize the story beats for this simple narrative structure. I learned what an act was, and I learned that each act needs to expose something or share something related to the story. Kind of obvious, I guess. Act 1 needs to share 3 overarching things and 3 minor things. It should expose the setting and the character or characters, and it should share who the character is, what their everyday life is like, and what's important to them. Then, to give the story direction, you need to expose the character's goals. This is often called the inciting incident. Sometimes this goal is much like in a quest. Alternatively, it can be something that must change inside the character, as in our character needs to become a hero. I learned that these goals can be subtle or subconscious to the character. This was the start of discovering the grid structure that I'll show you guys later. I wrote these 3 needs in a line at the top of my page, and the image of the grid started to click in my head. At the cusp of Act 1 and 2 is the first plot point. The characters start to head in the direction of the goal that they have. What story moments will move them towards their goal? What actions will they have to take? What kind of mindset do they need to have to start moving? Something that happens in Act 2 is the midpoint, which is a catastrophic circumstance that makes it feel almost impossible to reach the goal now. Learning about the midpoint helped me understand what I call stakes and steps. Stakes are things that get in between the character and their need. This is what we call the antagonist. I tried to imagine the antagonist as some kind of evil witch, but it can be just like the goals. It can be something subconscious or abstract that makes us think that the character won't make it to the end of the story without this initial thing. Steps are similar, but it's the opposite end of the spectrum. It's parts of the story that push the character towards their need. Both steps and stakes are introduced during Act 2 as potential changes. These are things that should scare us or give us hope, but the permanence of these changes isn't locked in yet. When I understood this about stakes, that's when the second row of the grid became obvious to me. This is where you put the potential changes that bridge the gap between Acts 1 and 3. Stakes and steps can be simply remembered like this. Stakes are possible changes we don't want to happen. Steps are possible changes we do want to happen. As I was processing all of this, I tried to find a good way to put this concept on the grid. So in Act 2, I wrote for who, what does that character learn that will change their who? How they think, how they act, how they feel, how they respond. For where, I wrote, how is their location changed? How is their metaphorical location changed? Stage of life, stage of relationship, stage of quest, i.e., almost there. For need, I wrote, what is getting in the way of them achieving their need? What is helping them achieve their need? I realized you can use this grid in a few different ways. First would be to lay out what the possible changes are. Then you would lay out what situations create those possible changes. Or you can do the opposite. Create situations and ask, what possible changes happen from these situations. I finally felt like I was understanding storytelling in a way that I never had before. The only thing to do now was to figure out how to end a story. In my study of the 3-act structure, I heard about the climax all the time. It's where Act 2 and 3 meet. Something I figured out while studying is the changes get locked in during Act 3. Not at the start of it. The very top of Act 3 is when the final battle to achieve the goal starts. There's no more stakes and no more steps, at least in the major sense. The final stake happened at the cusp of Act 2 and Act 3. Understanding that totally changed the game for me when it comes to ending stories. I kept trying to write the ending into Act 2 and leave Act 3 basically empty. It made Act 3 a semi-useless, super awkward part of all of my stories. So when I got this, I jumped over to the grid. I had to figure out that last section. The last section needs to show that the character's need is accomplished, their quest or their emotional need, etc. This is when I realized that all of these boxes are connected so much more deeply than I thought. Whatever I write in the Act 1 need section is going to impact the Act 3 who section. And all of the Act 3 section is connected to the Act 2 section. Act 3 is where all of the potential changes from Act 2 get clarified. Do they happen? Or are they overcome by something else? I think you can look at Act 3 in 2 different ways. You can see it as, what do I want to have happen at the end? And then bridge the gap in Act 2. Or you can ask, what potential changes from Act 2 do I want to keep? For Act 3, you'll pull over some of the things from Act 1, but some of the things from Act 1 will be blocked by Act 2. Out of those Act 2 blockades, new changes emerge for Act 3. Another question to ask to help fill in Act 3 is what stakes were accomplished and what steps were accomplished. I took all these grid concepts and worked them and molded them and practiced them until they made sense to me. Now I can see where my content lacks and I can work my heart out to give every video the great storytelling that will impact the people who watch it. I don't intend to give up, so please subscribe and join me in this pursuit. I finally created a tool that helped me truly understand storytelling, and now I'm testing it and sharing it with y'all. I would love if y'all would take this and practice it and try understanding it. Use it while you're watching movies to break down the story. Use it to build your own stories. I want to know where this system lacks and where it succeeds so I can continue to develop it and create the best guide and tool possible. First, I use this on unscripted content all the time. I find the story that's already there, and then I craft the edit. Then I add pieces from all over to amplify certain parts of the story. Sometimes I take a piece from the middle of the video and throw it into Act 1 because it fits the narrative better. Second, this guide can actually be expanded into a 5x3 grid, or even further into a grid that incorporates every story beat from the Act 3 structure. To make it 3x5, just write who, what, where, when, and why at the top. This will totally change the depth of your story structure. And thirdly, practice this. I'm still new to using this guide and I'm still learning new things about it to this day. Practice and you'll understand it more. Do you guys want to see some video examples of me using this guide and breaking it down? Let me know. Please share your thoughts on this video in the Discord channel and in the comments below. And sign up for my filmmaking course, which will be coming next year. If you sign up now, you get a massive discount. And thanks for watching. Why is there a helicopter right now? Why? There's never helicopters flying. Or what is this? It is a helicopter. Let me figure this out. Either they're coming after me or they're just gonna fly right directly above me. They just did a U-turn. They literally just flew in a circle. I don't understand what they're still going in a circle. They've now done like 75% of a circle. Just directly above me while I'm filming. Huh. How crazy.